From Atlanta, Georgia, this is Democracy Now!
We have a failing health care. I shouldn't say this to our great gentleman and my friend from Australia, because you have better health care than we do.
As Republicans cheer the passage of the plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, Democrats jeer, singing "Hey, hey, goodbye," suggesting Republicans will be voted out of office for stripping millions of Americans of health care. Meanwhile, even as Trump hails the Republican victory, he touts universal health care in a meeting with the Australian Prime Minister.
And what I heard today, the suffering still continues. So now that I know that it's not a civil matter anymore, now it's a human matter. Because Alton was human. He's no longer here, but his voice still will be heard through us. So stay behind us, because we love Alton, and we don't want this to end. Remember his name.
That's the family of Alton Sterling, an African-American father of 5 who was killed by police in 2016, calling for Louisiana State's Attorney General to bring criminal charges against his killers after the Trump Justice Department declined to bring federal charges against them. We'll also go to France, where voters are heading to the polls Sunday to pick between former investment banker Emmanuel Macron and far-right politician Marine Le Pen. Finally, Emory professor Carol Anderson on White Rage, the unspoken truth of our racial divide. It just won the National Book Circle's Critics Award for criticism.
As I had laid out in White Rage, part of what happened is that when African Americans advance, when they gain access to their citizenship rights, you see a wave of policies emanate out of Congress, out of the White House, to knock back those gains, those advancements.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia, as we travel the country covering the movements changing America. The House of Representatives Thursday voted narrowly to do away with the Affordable Care Act, replacing it with a health care bill that would dramatically roll back Medicaid, provide hundreds of billions of dollars in tax cuts to the wealthy, gut protections for patients with pre-existing conditions, and add tens of millions of Americans to the ranks of the uninsured. The legislation passed by a vote of 217 to 213, with 20 Republicans and every Democrat opposed. House Speaker Paul Ryan rushed the vote at the request of President Trump before the Congressional Budget Office had a chance to score the bill, meaning Republicans voted in favor of legislation whose full impact remains unknown. Speaker Ryan hailed the vote as an historic achievement.
A lot of us have been waiting 7 years to cast this vote. Many of us are here because we pledged to cast this very vote.
President Trump celebrated passage of the bill in a Rose Garden ceremony with Republican Congress members, saying the legislation would lower health care premiums. But a Center for American Progress analysis found surcharges on premiums for patients with pre-existing conditions could rise by over $140,000 for some cancer patients, while some women could see a 450% rise in the cost of insuring a pregnancy. The legislation would also block Medicaid reimbursements to Planned Parenthood for 1 year unless the Women's Health Group agrees to stop offering abortions. After the bill's passage, members of the Democratic caucus led a protest against Republicans outside the Capitol, chanting, "Vote them out." This is Vermont's independent Senator Bernie Sanders.
President Trump, you do not stand with the working class of this country when you throw 24 million people off of health insurance, when you raise premiums for older workers, when you defund Planned Parenthood, and when you cut Medicaid by $800 billion. And then on top of all of that, you give $300 billion in tax breaks to the top 2%. That is not standing with the working class of this country. That is going to war against the working class of this country.
The health care bill faces a steep climb in the Senate, where Republicans control just 52 out of the 100 seats. We'll have more on the House health care bill after headlines. In New York City, thousands of protesters marched Thursday to the USS Intrepid, a decommissioned aircraft carrier on the Hudson River, where President Trump later met with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. It was Trump's first return to his hometown since the inauguration. Protesters banged pots and pans and chanted anti-Trump slogans as police cordoned off streets near the site of Trump's visit. This is Jennifer Epps Addison of the Center for Popular Democracy.
This is the most hateful president our country has ever seen. His work is targeting immigrants and young people and poor people and the elderly. And we're here to build a country that really stands for every single person who lives within its borders. So we're here to say we resist this regime, we resist the politics of hate, and instead we're here to build a country that's based upon opportunity and freedom and equity for everyone.
The President Trump arrived at his meeting with Prime Minister Turnbull more than 3 hours late after Trump lingered in Washington to celebrate the House's passage of health care legislation. At a joint appearance, Trump praised Australia's health care system.
We have a failing health care. I shouldn't say this to our great gentleman and my friend from Australia, because you have better health care than we do.
Australia has universal health care with a government-run health care system known as Medicare, which is funded in part by a tax on wealthy Australians. President Trump Thursday signed an executive order relaxing rules on tax-exempt religious groups that could expand the role of churches and religious leaders in U.S. politics. In a statement, American Civil Liberties Union Director Anthony Romero promised a lawsuit, saying, quote, "The actions taken today are a broadside to our country's long-standing commitment to the separation of church and state. It's clear the Trump administration and congressional leadership are using religion as a wedge to further divide the country and permit discrimination," Romero said. In Georgia, a federal judge has ordered elections officials to reopen early voting registration ahead of a June 20th special election for the state's 6th congressional district. The election here pits Democrat Jon Ossoff against Republican Karen Handel in a race that's surprisingly close for a conservative district and which could be a bellwether for the 2018 midterm elections. Georgia shut down voter registration March 20th, but with Thursday's order, residents will have until May 21st to register. Meanwhile, Georgia's Republican Governor Nathan Deal Thursday signed a bill allowing students and others to carry concealed weapons on college campuses. The law was strongly opposed by police chiefs and university presidents, who will now be required to implement the law before it goes into effect on July 1st. In international news, in France, voters head to the polls Sunday in a presidential election that pits former investment banker Emmanuel Macron against far-right politician Marine Le Pen. Macron Thursday won the support of former U.S. President Barack Obama, who urged French voters to reject the politics of fear. Marine Le Pen, who's campaigned on an openly xenophobic and racist platform, faced protests Thursday as she visited a trucking company in Brittany. Protesters shouted, "Out, you fascists," and threw eggs at Le Pen, hitting her once in the head. Meanwhile, activists with Greenpeace unfurled a giant banner on the Eiffel Tower in Paris Friday, emblazoned with France's national motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, and the hashtag resist, calling on voters to reject Le Pen and her party. We'll have more on the French elections after headlines. In Mexico, the Committee to Protect Journalists blasted President Enrique Peña Nieto for failing to shield media workers, saying criminal gangs and corrupt officials kidnap and murder with impunity to silence critics. This is CPJ coordinator Carlos Lauria.
The reality is that violence against journalists is a problem that goes beyond journalism. It's affecting fundamental human rights of all Mexicans, including journalists and reporters. It's inhibiting the possibility that Mexicans openly debate the problems that afflict society, and indirectly it is also affecting the stability of the country's democracy.
More than 100 journalists have been murdered in Mexico since 2000, and last March was the worst month on record, with at least 7 journalists shot across Mexico. In Argentina, human rights groups are condemning a Supreme Court ruling that could bring an early release to hundreds of people convicted for human rights abuses during the U.S.-backed dirty wars of the 70s. This is Estela de Carlotto, president of the Association of Grandmothers at the Plaza de Mayo.
For the people, the clear message is this does not affect those of us who have already been affected for 40 years. It affects the children of the people, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the people. What is not judged and condemned will be repeated, and those who disagree that history will be repeated will face what our children suffered. The 30,000 disappeared.
An estimated 30,000 activists were tortured and disappeared in the late 70s and early 80s by Argentina's right-wing dictatorship. Back in the United States, thousands of homeowners in Flint, Michigan could face foreclosure over unpaid water bills, even though the water from their taps is poisoned with lead. This week, the city sent some 8,000 Flint residents letters warning them they'll have tax liens placed on their homes if they don't pay outstanding water bills by May 19th. Those who can't pay by the end of next February could lose their homes. Flint's water crisis began in 2014 after the unelected, state-appointed emergency manager for the city of Flint changed the source of the drinking water to the Flint River in order to save money. The river water corroded Flint's pipes, causing toxic lead to leach into the city's drinking water. Officials say Flint's water is still unsafe to drink without a filter. In Chicago, a union representing nursing home workers struck an 11th-hour deal Thursday to avert a strike that would have seen as many as 5,000 certified nursing assistants, janitors, and laundry workers walk off the job. Members of SEIU Healthcare Illinois will see raises 40% or more over the life of their new 3-year contract. And in New Haven, Connecticut, 8 unionized graduate students at Yale have entered their second week without food in a hunger strike aimed at forcing their university to the bargaining table. Graduate students in 8 different departments voted in February to join Unite Here, Local 33, but Yale administrators are contesting the results. The hunger-striking students fear they could be stripped of their union membership if Yale delays long enough for President Trump to appoint conservative members to the National Labor Relations Board. The appointments could mean the NLRB will overturn a ruling last year that classified graduate student teachers as employees eligible to join unions. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Republicans in Washington have moved one step closer to repealing Obamacare. On Thursday, the House narrowly approved legislation that would result in tens of millions of people losing health insurance while providing a massive tax break to the rich.
The ayes are 217, the nays are 213. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
However, the future of the bill remains in doubt as Republican senators have vowed to write their own health care bill instead of taking up the House bill. Shortly after the vote, President Trump hosted Republican lawmakers at the White House Rose Garden for a celebration.
This is a great plan. I actually think it will get even better. And this is, make no mistake, this is a repeal and a replace of Obamacare. Make no mistake about it.
President Trump praised the bill. Most major medical organizations and the AARP warned the bill will cause serious harm to patients and drive up the cost of health care. The Congressional Budget Office was not given enough time to score the legislation, meaning the House voted on the bill without knowing its projected impact. The CBO projected 24 million people would lose health insurance under an earlier version of the Republican bill. The bill was opposed by almost every sector in the health care industry, including hospitals, doctors, health insurers, and consumer groups. Critics of the bill faulted numerous provisions. Under the new bill, health insurance companies would be allowed to charge customers with pre-existing conditions as much as they want. The list of pre-existing conditions include rape, sexual assault, postpartum depression, cesarean sections, and surviving domestic violence. It would roll back the expansion of Medicaid and cut Medicaid by $880 billion over 10 years. The bill also puts a cap on federal spending per person, including seniors and children under Medicaid. The bill also blocks Medicaid funds going to reimburse Planned Parenthood for providing preventive care to women. We're joined now by two guests. In Washington, D.C., Margarita George is with us, co-executive director of Healthcare for America Now and Healthcare for America Now Education Fund. And here in Atlanta, Monica Simpson is with us, executive director of Sister Song, a woman of color reproductive health collective. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! We're going to begin with Margarita George in Washington. Can you explain what it is that the Republicans passed in the House?
Well, you've covered a lot of it. You know, I could continue and say a lot of even worse things about it, but let me say just a couple of things. One thing is that the Affordable Care Act was largely a bill that created a set of rules for insurance companies. And the rules for these insurance companies were critical because if you remember before the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies could charge whatever they wanted for pre-existing conditions. They could charge a woman more for an insurance policy than they would charge a man for a comparable policy, and that policy often wouldn't even include things like birth control or maternity care or prenatal care. So a lot of these rules really addressed issues of fairness, equity, and protected consumers from being overcharged. So many of those provisions, some of the most popular provisions in the bill are being rolled back. And that's a lot of what folks are hearing about the pre-existing conditions and insurers being able to waive pre-existing conditions in certain states and charge people, 30% if their coverage lapse, does away with annual protections against, annual caps and limitations on coverage. And certainly things like essential health benefits, the 10 categories of essential health benefits that insurance companies are now required to cover, which I feel like got a little bit of publicity, but not that much. It used to be that insurance companies could pretty much sell anything they wanted as insurance. And so they would sell policies that had just catastrophic coverage, or as I said before, they would sell policies to women that didn't cover maternity, didn't cover gynecological care. Part of why the essential health benefits piece of Obamacare is so critical is because it mandates that insurance policies have a standard and that they cover things that we might think about as basic, but that previously weren't covered. And there are things like mental health coverage, like hospitalization, ambulatory care, if you need to go to the hospital in an ambulance, prescription drugs, right? If you've got somebody, we have lots of folks who require prescription drugs to control conditions or as part of their treatment. So some things that we might consider to be pretty basic things. So I think those things are really critical. And then the second thing that I would sort of lift up is, and I have found there's been confusion about this, but the cuts to Medicaid aren't just cuts to the Medicaid that's been expanded in states so that more people can get coverage. The cuts to Medicaid actually go after traditional Medicaid. So this is the Medicaid that most folks in America are already familiar with, that covers elderly people, that covers many children. 40% of recipients of Medicaid in this country are children. It's the largest payer of family planning, Planned Parenthood and other providers that are providing people with family planning services. In many states, it's the largest payer of birth. In Florida, it pays for over 50% of all births. So this is a program that is really essential to people's lives and that has been essential long before the ACA came along. And the proposal in this bill would fundamentally change that program forever, creating permanent cuts to the program that would really ration care and shift enormous burdens to state budgets that might then even force cuts in other services. So there's a lot of bad stuff in this bill. We could spend quite a long time talking about it, but I just wanted to highlight those several things that I feel like sometimes don't get as much attention.
So what does it mean that the CBO, Margarita, did not score this? I mean, when the first health care bill that went down was scored, I mean, it wasn't hard to remember this well. Right before the CBO scored it, the Republicans were making great headway. And then as soon as the CBO scored it and said 24 million Americans would lose health care, there wasn't a chance this bill was going to pass. But President Trump ensured that this vote would happen before the scoring by the Congressional Budget Office. What's the significance of this? What do you expect we will learn when it is scored?
I mean, I think we'll learn that the impact of the bill is even worse than we thought. And, you know, shouldn't be any surprise that the Republicans have done everything that they can to obscure the impact of the bill. This whole process has been conducted without one single hearing through the reconciliation process that is purposely being used to rush this thing through. And it's only thanks to the activism, the support, the outrage of the public at town hall meetings and during recesses that we've even been able to get this much information. Because keep in mind that the plan from the beginning was that the Republicans wanted to have this piece of legislation pass through both chambers and on the president's desk to sign on his first day in office. So it's been quite an accomplishment to delay that and to force them to answer questions about the impact of the bill. But certainly, you know, the impact overall isn't just on health care. It really raises questions that I think are bigger questions about the administration and about Republicans in Congress, about what they actually believe about democracy, that they would rush a bill that could potentially restructure a sixth of the economy without even basic data from a nonpartisan source about what the impact is going to be, through a process that didn't give anybody an opportunity to weigh in, offer information. The fact is they didn't go to any experts, and that's why often when we hear the Republicans talking about the impact of the bill, they say things that are just silly. Because, in fact, it's not based on any data or anything that is, you know, in fact, factual.
I want to turn to Republican New York Congressmember Chris Collins, who admitted he didn't actually read the health care bill despite voting for it. This is Collins speaking to CNN's Wolf Blitzer.
You know, I have to rely on my staff, and I can probably tell you that I read every word, and I wouldn't be telling you the truth, nor would any other member. We rely on our staff, and we rely on our committees, and I'm comfortable that I understand this bill in its entirety, Wolf, without pouring through every word, and I'm just being quite honest.
Margarita Jorge, I wanted to get your response to this. Going back a couple of years, you have, was it Paul Ryan, who said, will Speaker Pelosi wait for the final number from the CBO? I don't think we should pass bills that we haven't read, that we don't know what they cost, Paul Ryan said in July of 2009.
Mm-hmm. Well, here you have it, right? I mean, I think this is part of this overall hypocrisy that we're seeing. I mean, many Republicans expressed a lot of uncertainty about this bill. This last amendment that we just saw, the Upton-Long amendment, which really didn't do much to improve the bill. It added a tiny amount of money to high-risk pools. High-risk pools, as people probably already know, are a pretty ineffective way for people who have health care needs to manage their health care needs. And Upton said, even as he added this amount to the high-risk pools, I'm not sure if this is going to be enough. Like, I'm not sure if this is going to work. So, you know, I think the speed of the process, the commitment of the Republicans to keep their promise to their political base was what has been driving this push on repeal and will continue to drive their ideology around health care. It always has, and that will continue. And I frankly think they're not that preoccupied with facts. And the quote from Collins is a frightening quote. What a decision to have made to impact so many people in his state, in his district, and across the country without even reading the bill. The bill is not even that long. I mean, it makes me wonder, did you read the amendments? So, you know, I just think the whole process, the bill is terrible. The process has been terrible and disturbing, and it does not bode well for, you know, what's going to happen moving forward in the next step of the process.
I want to bring Monica Simpson into this conversation, who is the executive director of Sister Song, a woman of color reproductive health collective here in Atlanta, Georgia. The significance of what's happened, the penalizing of the cutting off funds to Planned Parenthood if they provide abortion, which is a part of what they do. How will this affect people?
It greatly affects people, especially the folks that we work with every single day on the ground, the most marginalized communities, women of color, low-income communities. It impacts their access to health care. It impacts their ability to survive and to thrive in great ways. And that's the thing that really troubles me about the moves of this administration, because it doesn't seem like they're centering the needs of the most marginalized communities. They're not thinking about the lives of these communities and thinking about how this will affect Planned Parenthood and defunding those services that, yes, provide abortion access, because abortion access is a part of overall health care, right, for women. And what's important to also note is that this also prevents screenings, very important screenings around cancer. It provides maternity care. It provides an opportunity for people to have STI, STD screenings. And so this is for the totality of our lives, and to have an administration move in this way that limits and prohibits that is really scary. Really scary for us on the ground.
Mm-hmm. So what has the situation been for Georgia? Georgia, Governor Nathan Deal did not go forward on Medicaid expansion.
No. No, he didn't. And we saw this across the region. It was something that Southern activists all across this region were fighting for, Medicaid expansion. And so with us being one of those states in this region that did not move to do that, hundreds of thousands of folks still fell in that gap, not being able to have access to the services that they need for themselves and their families. And so when we already were dealing with those large gaps, to now put this on top of that really continues to send the message that this administration doesn't care about the lives of the American people.
Monica Simpson, I wanted to ask you about something else that happened on Thursday in Washington. Yes. President Trump signed an executive order that would allow religious organizations what he described as greater freedom in political speech. Your thoughts about this measure and what it actually means? It does not mean it goes into force. It would need legislation. It would need Congress to pass it.
Definitely, but this is also very troubling, right? Because, if we look at the narrative behind what this executive order means, he's trying to move not all religious people. He's really talking about a certain type of religious person, right? He's talking about those fundamentalists, those folks who are really trying to have political power to move a certain agenda. And for those types of measures, we see things that happen like in the state of North Carolina with transgender bathroom bills. We see those types of legislating starting to seep in whenever you move this type of religious liberty forward that he is calling. And so what we know historically is that religion has been used to really move some really harsh things forward. We can go all the way back to the beginning where, slavery was, definitely we talk about how they use religion to really justify slavery. And so if we continue to take that down the line, we can see things like that really start to creep in again. We don't want our communities to go backward. Well, we don't want people to be in jeopardy. We don't want people to live in fear. And when moving those types of things forward, those types of executive orders, that's the message that he's sending.
And it also means that preachers, that ministers, that religious people could endorse candidates from the pulpit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is moving forward a political agenda. And that is why we have separation of church and state. But that's not what happens whenever you move these types of things forward.
Well, I want to thank you, Monica Simpson, Executive Director of Sister Song, a woman of color reproductive health collective here in Atlanta, Georgia, and Margarita George of Healthcare for America Now in Washington, D.C. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we're going to France to find out about this runoff election that's taking place this weekend. Stay with us.
That's what happens when I get lost in my mind. That's what happens when I get lost in my mind. I'm going up the hill to watch the lights, close my eyes to feel the boom, the boom. My legs hurt, I've been walking for so long. I feel I'm running out on the ground, on the ground, on the ground. That's what happens when I get lost in my mind. That's what happens when I get lost in my mind. My book
lost in my mind. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In France, voters head to the polls Sunday in a presidential election that pits former investment banker Emmanuel Macron against far-right politician Marine Le Pen. Macron on Thursday won the support of former U.S. President Barack Obama, who urged French voters to reject the politics of fear. Le Pen, whose campaigned on an openly xenophobic and racist platform, faced protests Thursday as she campaigned at a trucking company in Brittany. Protesters shouted, "Out, you fascists," and threw eggs at Le Pen, hitting her once in the head. Le Pen has called for France to crack down on immigration and leave the European Union. For more, we go to Paris, where we're joined by Yasser Louati, French human rights and civil liberties activist and researcher. It's good to have you with us, Yasser. Can you talk about the significance of this runoff election this weekend?
Well, hi, Amy. Hi, everybody. The situation actually illustrates the normalization of racist rhetoric in France for the past 35 years. In 2002, there was huge demonstrations against the arrival of Marine Le Pen's father in the second round of the election. But today, public opinion has been prepared to see her arrive in the second round, and that's why you don't see that many mass movements against her very presence. But that is not happening out of, a coincidence. Racism, especially Islamophobia in France, is a point of convergence from the far left to the far right. So they can disagree on anything, but when it comes to stigmatizing, singling out the Muslim population of France, everybody agrees. So another example is that the three openly racist candidates, Marine Le Pen, François Fillon, and Dupont-Aignan, altogether won 46% of the votes during the first round. So regardless of whether Marine Le Pen makes it to the Élysée presidential palace, her ideas already won, and a signal was sent to us last summer during the Burkini hysteria, which actually rooted the campaign on identity politics. And if you look at the last presidential debate that happened 2 days ago, they spoke about identity politics, but socio-economic policies were very vague. Marine Le Pen spoke about shutting borders and protecting France from Europe without saying how she will prevent a recession. And Emmanuel Macron said, he wants to launch a nation of startup companies. And in my humble opinion, that will definitely decimate the working class behind the cool attitude of startup companies. Why? Because they will be dependent on what I call, or they will be stuck in what I call a digital proletarian. You will have a huge corporations online making, thousands and millions of people sell their labor without much benefits.
You wrote a piece, Yasser Louati, French elections, Marine Le Pen or Emmanuel Macron, Hitler or Uber. Explain.
Well, it's again the choice of the lesser of two evils. You saw that in America between Donald Trump and the highly unpopular Hillary Clinton, and today that's what it is being imposed upon the French. They have to choose between an openly racist candidate like Marine Le Pen, who promises the supremacy of whites and Christians regardless of our constitution, of our tradition of separation between church and the state. And on the other hand, you have Emmanuel Macron, who appears to be this young guy who sends a signal of, yes, it's going to be about empowering people through entrepreneurship. The problem is that his version of society is that you run a country like you run a company, and the problem is that nothing in his program actually goes alongside the working class. Another point, and that's a huge trap being set up by neoliberals all around the world, they come and tap you on the shoulder and say, well, racism is evil. In our case in France, Islamophobia is evil. The problem is that what's the point of saying Islamophobia is evil if it is to implement a neoliberal agenda that will actually feed into racist rhetoric by putting people into more competition? So right now, the French are being asked to choose between the lesser of two evils, but either choice won't make the situation better. And that's why in the analysis that I see is that the immediate urgency is to block Marine Le Pen from becoming president, but the very next one is actually to make the country ungovernable for Emmanuel Macron, because we have the upcoming parliamentary elections, and given his status and his lack of alliances, he will depend on existing MPs in parliament, and that's a signal for independent candidates
to rush to the ballot, register as candidates, and carry forward with a more progressive agenda.
Activists with Greenpeace unfurled a giant banner on the Eiffel Tower in Paris Friday, emblazoned with France's national motto and the hashtag resist. This is Jean-François Julliard.
Today's action is this banner deployed behind me under the Eiffel Tower with the values of our national motto, liberty, equality, fraternity. The idea was to remind people the importance of these values 2 days before the presidential election, and to say that today, the biggest threat to these values is the potential election of Marine Le Pen and the National Front.
That was Jean-François Julliard. Finally, among the issues that Marine Le Pen has raised, the far-right xenophobic candidate, was that the French did not round up Jews in Paris and put them in the stadium. Yasser Louati, you're an Arab-French human rights activist. The response to this, the denial of a well-known fact about the Holocaust.
When I first heard that, I was, it was beyond words and caused deep revulsion. The French police that we have today was born under the Maréchal Pétain, who collaborated with the Nazis and who sent the kids of France to the death camps. That same government is the government that allowed state officials to carry these policies, and after the collaborationist government of Maréchal Pétain, who rounded up the Jews, after that government fell, they were not sent to jail. Actually, they continued their careers within the French apparatus. What Marine Le Pen is trying to do is to always whitewash the crimes of France. As a matter of fact, while white Christian France was collaborating with the Nazis and selling out to Hitler, blacks and Arabs and Muslim soldiers were chasing Nazis around and freeing the country, starting from the island of Corsica all the way up to Paris. But that was also a strong signal to the Zionist organizations in France, who also made clear that Marine Le Pen was now approachable by turning away from anti-Semitism and heavily investing into Islamophobia. But she had to make that declaration in order to reassure her ideological basis by saying that France was not guilty. France was guilty of collaborating with the Nazis and for sending its own Jewish kids to the death camps. There is no question about it. Historians agree on that. And now Marine Le Pen just tries to minimize the implications. It's like the same people who tell you, well, colonization brought some goods into Africa. No, it did not. As long as you have a domination of one group over another and you legitimize the killings of innocents because they happen to be from a different ethnic background or religion, that makes you a criminal. And one last point is that Marine Le Pen herself's party is actually the direct inheritance or the direct legacy from the people who rounded up Jews in the 1940s.
Yasser Louati, I want to thank you for being with us. We'll continue to follow what happens over the weekend. French human rights and civil liberties activist and researcher speaking to us from Paris. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll be speaking with the head of the NAACP about what has happened in Louisiana with the killing of Alton Sterling and the Justice Department closing the case without indicting the police officers. Also, a teenager killed in Dallas. We'll get the latest. And we'll speak with Carol Anderson, who just won a major literary award. She's a professor at Emory University. Her book is called White Rage. Stay with us.
They say my treason is my blood, it's the price I pay. Not a penny to my name, not a penny to my name. And the cold crown on my face that I've done, they don't say. Now they don't hesitate, say they won't hesitate. You know my knees drop when you fall, whoever you are, wherever you are. My heart stops when you call, whoever you are, wherever you are. My knees drop when you fall, whoever you are, wherever you are. My heart stops when you call, whoever you are, wherever you are. It's
Shell shock. Alice Smith here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Yes, we're in the South. We're in Atlanta, Georgia. But we're going to talk about what happened in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The family of Alton Sterling, the African-American father of 5 who was killed by police in 2016. The family called Wednesday for the state's attorney general to bring criminal charges against his killers. The call came after the Justice Department declined to bring federal charges against officers Blaine Salamone and Howie Lake. Sterling family lawyer Chris Stewart said the U.S. Attorney's Office provided new details about the killing, including how Officer Salamone shot Sterling 6 times.
We learned some new things today. We learned that Officer Salamone walked up to Alton Sterling and put a gun to his head and said, "I'll kill you, bitch." You heard me correctly. We heard from them that Officer Salamone kept instigating this situation. You heard me correctly. The Attorney General has a phenomenal case because no police officer should conduct themselves like that.
In a statement, Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry promised a thorough investigation into whether to charge officers Lake and Salamone. Alton Sterling's aunt, Sandra Sterling, said she was devastated after learning new details about how her nephew was killed.
And what I heard today, the suffering still continues. So now that I know that it's not a civil matter anymore, now it's a human matter. Because Alton was human. He's no longer here, but his voice still will be heard through us. So stay behind us, because we love Alton, and we don't want this to end. Remember his name.
Alton Sterling's killing on July 5th, 2016 sparked nationwide protests against police brutality. For more, we're going to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Cornell William Brooks, president and CEO of NAACP, also longtime human rights activist, civil rights lawyer, and minister. Welcome back to Democracy Now! Let's start with Alton Sterling. What are you calling for at the NAACP?
We're calling for the Attorney General of the state of Louisiana to conduct a thorough investigation and to vigorously pursue charges against these police officers. The fact that Mr. Salamone put a gun to Alton Sterling's head, referred to him with a slur, cursed him, if you will. Those actions suggest his propensity to use violence, and those actions also put into context any actions by Mr. Sterling. This whole encounter from beginning to end was less than a few minutes. So in other words, from the time Mr. Sterling was confronted by these police officers, having a gun put to his head and being shot less than 30 seconds after he was pinned to the ground, took place in a matter of minutes. This is not standard operating procedure. This is not standard community policing. And so we're asking that the Attorney General conduct a thorough investigation, that he consider the full range of the officer's conduct during the encounter, but also the kind of officer he was and is. This happens with a brutal regularity, as you know, quite well. Between 950 and 1,000 people lose their lives at the hands of the police every year. A young black man is 21 times more likely to lose his hands at the police than his white counterpart. This occurs with a brutal normalcy that we cannot countenance, we cannot put up with. And so, yes, the state investigation should continue because the state standard, as opposed to the federal standard, is broader and lower, therefore not easy to meet, but easier to meet than the federal standard that the Department of Justice declined to pursue charges under.
I mean, what's truly astounding, the only people arrested in this case, in the death of Alton Sterling, were 2 men. One was Abdullah Maflahi. He owned the Triple S convenience store.
That's right.
They took his video, because, of course, he had video at the store, surveillance video. And the other person was Chris Leday, who works at a military base here in Georgia, saw video from bystanders posted online. Before he knew it, at the military base, he was handcuffed. He was frog-marched across the across the military base, and he was jailed. This is for posting the video, and we see how horrifying that video is, that Alton Sterling was shot at point-blank range as he lay on his back.
That's right. 3 in the chest, 3 bullets in the chest, 3 in the back. And what's so frightening here is that these investigations, state and federal, are being conducted in an atmosphere of dangerous silence and dangerous presumption. Dangerous silence in the sense that this code of blue prevents people from coming forward. It inhibits a free and frank discussion and testimony with respect to what's happened in so many instances, but also a code of dangerous presumption. Namely, the conduct of officers is presumed to be reasonable, assumed to be reasonable in the face of god-awful facts. The fact that this man lost his life in a matter of moments, after being accosted by a police officer, spoken to in the most vile way, with a gun pointed to his head. This says everything, not only about the value or lack of value of Alton Sterling's life, but the value of black lives across the country and the lack of humanity that black lives are accorded in this country. And I would say that extends to the lives of others, members of the Muslim community, LGBTQ community, folks who are Latino. But we've got rogue policing going on, and we, in fact, have far too many prosecutors, far too many police chiefs, and certainly an attorney general who does not appreciate the breadth and the reality of this.
I want to turn to the case of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards in Texas. Yes. He was killed on Saturday in the Dallas suburb of Balch Springs by police officer Roy Oliver, who shot the black teen in the head while he was in a car leaving a party. Oliver was fired Tuesday. This is Esley Merritt, an attorney for Jordan Edwards' family, speaking at a news conference.
This incident happened just Saturday. The family is extremely raw. The community is extremely raw. And they're demanding transparency, and we, on behalf of the family, are demanding action from the Balch Springs Police Department, action from the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, and change. We are declaring war on bad policing. This has happened far too often. We are tired of making the same rhetorical demands, of having the same hashtags.
So you went, Cornell William Brooks, to Dallas right after this happened. Talk about what's happening there.
What's happening is you have a you have a family that requested that marches and demonstrations not be done until after the funeral. They are grappling with most incomprehensible grief. And yet you have a larger community beyond the family also grieving, schoolmates grieving. We conducted a prayer vigil with the family's attorney present, an interfaith coalition, imams, a rabbi, Christian clergy present, and millennials. We conduct this prayer vigil to train young people in civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action, but also to pray for the family and pray for the community. What we know is this: where we have seen young black and brown lives taken at will and at whim of the police in case after case after case across this country, it is only because of public pressure that these cases get any attention and any pretense of investigation anywhere in the country. So we have to keep the pressure up. We have to continue to make these cases and these names known. What we notice in the community, obviously, the fact that people are grieving. But beyond that, we also notice that community members are demanding that we not go through this same cycle of lives lost, hashtags created, police offering explanations that don't explain, and investigations don't lead it to anywhere, or charges that don't lead to convictions. We've got to break this ugly and vicious do loop. And so what the NAACP has done is that we went to this prayer vigil, but we are also talking about considering pursuing an independent investigation. hiring our own investigators, looking into this matter ourselves. This has been done before. It is an option. It is a way of bringing evidence forward. In Ferguson, we worked with the prosecutors to encourage people to come forward, but perhaps we need to conduct our own investigation to get people to come forward, to get them to speak about what happened here. The point being here, Amy, is that we cannot continue doing business as usual when business as usual is resulting in the death and destruction of black lives all across this country. And the fact of the matter is, in the last century, the NAACP brought an end to lynching. This lynching by those in blue with gold badges can be brought to an end in this century if we as a country decide to do so. Now, this decision to do so has to begin at the top, and that means our Attorney General acknowledging, the Department of Justice acknowledging the reality of this. You cannot add a blessing and a benediction to bad policing by saying you're not going to use consent decrees, by saying you're going to open up, re-examine consent decrees that have been agreed upon by the previous administration. You cannot say that consent decrees and holding police officers accountable leads to crime as opposed to decreasing crime and making both police officers and communities safer. This we know. This is a moment in our democracy where we have got to not only call for reform, but demand reform. And that means not only lawyers in the courts pursuing charges, pursuing prosecution of bad police officers, but it also means activists in the streets engaging in serious civil disobedience, serious disruption of business as usual, and literally bringing this system of police misconduct and brutality to a grinding halt. It has to happen.
Were you arrested once or twice in Senator Sessions' office protesting twice in Senator Sessions' office in Alabama, protesting him becoming the Attorney General of the United States? I want to thank you, Cornell William Brooks, for joining us, head of the NAACP. As we turn now to another guest, we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia, home to Emory University. And I want to bring into this conversation Carol Anderson, who's chair of Emory's African American Studies Department. Carol Anderson's book, White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of a Racial Divide, just won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism. Jurors called it, quote, a searing critique of white America's systematic resistance to African-American advancement. Carol Anderson, from that picture I saw of you winning the award, you were rather surprised. But the power of your book has not been lost on anyone. In these last minutes we have together, can you talk about the significance of what's happening right now?
Yeah, what we're seeing right now is the penultimate in white rage. We had a black president. We had African Americans and Latinos coming out in scores, voting for the first time, participating in this democracy. And the response has been a legislative and judicial, given the Shelby County v. Holder decision by the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act, a response to, in fact, undermine and undercut that black advancement. What we now have is Donald Trump, because it is with voter suppression, given felony disfranchisement in Florida, given the chicanery in North Carolina, the chicanery in Wisconsin with all of the voter IDs back and forth, that in fact led to this very narrowed victory that put a white nationalist regime in power in the United States. And from there, you then get these policies, such as Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, who happened to greet Donald Trump surrounded by women in antebellum dresses, to give you a sense of what Make America Great Again means to them.
The Sessions Justice Department took down the Civil Rights page in the Justice Department and put up the Standing Up for Law Enforcement page.
Yes. And again, that is law and order. That is pure dog whistle from the Nixon years, from the Reagan years. And what that has led to has been the mass incarceration of African African Americans and Latinos. What it has led to is the undermining of the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65.
What do you say, Professor Anderson, to those? I mean, there are those who say that Donald Trump is an outright racist, white supremacist, white nationalist. There are others who say he's just speaking his mind. He tosses political correctness. What do you say?
I say that's a load of hooey. And what I mean by that is he started his campaign by getting the groundwork with the birtherism, which was sheer racism, demanding to see Obama's birth certificate. And then he launches his campaign by saying Mexicans are rapists and criminals. Now, what would have normally had led somebody to be distanced from that, where she's saying, no, we want no part of that. In fact, it drew that GOP base in to a depth of fervor where the latest polls have shown that what was driving his base was not all of this economic anxiety that pundits talked about, but was the increasing diversity of America. The fact that America was becoming more black and more brown. And so his white base said, we can't have that. We have got to somehow secure the power and the resources of the United States in our hands alone.
So how does this all... Your book came out before Donald Trump was inaugurated, yes. But it's called White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide.
Yes.
How does this presidency underscore what you have found?
It underscores it beautifully because you see all of this masking in terms of language. So, for instance, let's take the health care bill that Trump pushed forward, that the one that just passed the House. When you begin to really look at it, it goes after women, it goes after the poor, and it goes after black people. It goes after those who are getting out of their place. But it's doing so in this really innocuous language of democracy, that this is going to bring about greater options and greater choice, when in fact what it's going to do is impoverish and sicken millions upon millions of Americans and have a massive transfer of wealth to the top 400 families under the guise of democracy. That's white rage.
I want to thank you so much for being with us. Professor Carol Anderson is chair of the African American Studies Department at Emory University, and she is author of the book White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide, which just won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism. And that does it for our show. By the way, we have openings for a video news fellow and many internships. Check our websites. Apply immediately at DemocracyNow.org. We're on our many-city Democracy Now! Covering the Movement's Changing America tour. I'll be speaking today at 2 p.m. at Carleton College in Minnesota and at 6:30 p.m. at Augsburg College in Minneapolis. Then on Saturday, we're on to Madison at 1:30 p.m. and in Chicago at 7 p.m. And Sunday, I'll be speaking in Michigan in 3 cities, in Kalamazoo at 11 a.m., in Lansing at 2 p.m., and in Grand Rapids at 5:30 p.m. On Monday night, I'll be speaking at the Philadelphia Free Library at 7:30. And then on Wednesday, May 10th, I'll be speaking at Seattle Town Hall in Washington. On Friday, May 12th, I'll be speaking at the New School in New York City. You can go to our website, check all the details at DemocracyNow.org. Then we're on to Oregon and California. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermin Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Ravi Karen, Hani Massoud, Trina Nadura, and Andre Lewis. Special thanks to Dennis Moynihan, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Paul Huckabee, our engineers. Thanks to Becca Staley and Julie Crosby. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.